Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. As part of the Miami University Alumni Association's webinar series, today we present Secrets to Creating a Great Virtual Work Culture and what the future of remote work looks like. Joining us for today's conversation are College of Engineering and Computing alumni Larry English, class of 90, and Amy Leschke-Kahle, class of 88. Larry is a Miami grad, obviously, in 1990, and is co-founder and president of Centric Consulting, an award-winning business and technology consulting firm, and author of Office Optional: How to Build a Connected Culture with Virtual Teams. Larry's firm has been operating using a remote work model since its founding more than 2 decades ago. Before Centric Consulting, Larry worked for a large international consulting firm out of college until he got burned out at the tender age of 25. After some serious reflection on a backpacking journey around the world with his newlywed wife, he and his like-minded pals founded Centric with a mission to change how consulting was done by building a remote company with a culture of employee and client happiness. Today, Centric is a 1,000 plus person company with offices in 12 U.S. cities and India. Larry is the father to 4 boys and husband to a very adventurous wife, and they currently reside in Columbus, Ohio. Larry holds a BS in systems analysis from Miami. Amy, a 1988 grad, is widely recognized human resource thought leader who began her career as a chemical engineer. With a science background and a passion for people-focused work, her strength has become solving hard problems that you can't see. As VP of Performance Acceleration at the Marcus Buckingham Company, an ADP company, Amy collaborates with clients to transform employee engagement and performance around the world. She uses firsthand experience and proven technique for measuring engagement and performance to customize her approach to the unique culture of each company to find sustainable solutions to problems. Amy has led learning and development HR technology and HR analytics teams for several Fortune 500 companies. She most recently served as VP of HR Services Solution Center for a large national retailer. Amy holds a chemical engineering degree from Miami, as well as an MBA from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us. Questions were collected today during registration, and our guests will attempt to address most of those throughout the webinar today. You'll also have the option to ask a question live during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. Please note, in the interest of time, we may not get to every question. Today's webinar will last about an hour, including time for Q&A. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to College of Engineering and Computing Dean, Dr. Beena Sukumaran, to get our conversation started. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, Molly, and welcome, Larry, and welcome, Amy. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. This webinar is actually sponsored by the Dean's Office of the College of Engineering and Computing, as well as our CEC, Women's Advisory Council. And it's such a timely topic, and I know that lots of industries and our campus has been tussling with this topic on how do we manage remote work. How do we create a workplace culture when lots of us are working remotely, or half of us are working remotely and half of us are in person, or whatever the combination might be. So we have these 2 outstanding experts, and I also wanted to highlight both of them are alumni of our college. So it also shows what what is possible with an engineering and computing degree, because you don't have to do traditional engineering and computing, because both of you are thought leaders in this field, and you've thought of this for a long, long time and made some conscious choices. So I'm so looking forward to this conversation. So please take it away, Larry and Amy.
Oh, thank you so much, Beena. And I'm so happy to be here and partnering with Miami on this really important and just unbelievably timely topic, obviously. And, Beena said it really well, Larry, and talked about how we've both done this, where we have this very technical data focused degree that we got our bachelor's degree in, but yet we've kind of taken a slightly different path. And I'm just a little bit curious as we start out, kind of, I mean, I know you did some things, you got burned out, you went all over the world and backpacked, but kind of how did you get here, and how do you think that your degree that you got is really serving you now in what you do?
Sure. So I'll add a little color commentary to the intro. So I did get burned out, and I had a midlife crisis at 25, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And as Bina mentioned, I made a conscious decision, but I was trying to find my way about who I was as a person and what was going to be the most fulfilling career and life for me. And so on that worldwide trip that I was doing, I was laying on a beach in Bali, and I was reading a book, and there's a quote in one of the books that said, Southern Florida is filled with people who wanted to do something big in their life, but they waited until it was safe. And now it's safe, and they're retired in Southern Florida. So for me, I knew I wanted to take risk. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was my mission. And I figured that out fairly early on. And so I came back and I did multiple startups and was really learning how to do that. And what was interesting is along the way, I couldn't find exactly the exact business model that made me happy. And so decided to create it. And so when we started the company about 20 years ago, we were trying to keep all the good things we loved about consulting and get rid of all the bad things. And one of the ideas that we had early on was we thought our employees would be happier if they could work remote when they weren't at a client site. So we thought they would have better work-life balance and be happier. And so we did that 20 years ago. And so we've known this secret that this is a great way to live and work for a long time, but nobody believed us. And we'll get into that in a little bit here. And how about yourself, Amy? How did you go from a paper science and engineering degree to where you're at now?
Yeah, very similar. In a way, I kind of fell into this work of HR, and people ask me this all the time. And Molly read it in my bio. And the way I think about it is about solving really hard problems that you can't see. I mean, that's what you learned. It's what I learned at Miami. It's what has served me so well in my career in so many different ways. And even though people think I left engineering, I still have that engineering mindset. I still have that problem solving mindset and use those tools every single day. And I kind of fell into what I did. I kind of started, creating a path for myself of doing a little bit more work that I love, doing a little bit more work that I love, and ended up in a place where I've taken all of my experience, my expertise, the things that I love to do, and really applied them more broadly now that I'm kind of working on the kind of consulting professional services side of things, helping companies just like you do work differently and do it so much better. And that kind of brings us to, I think, our first question, Larry, is obviously with the unpredictable, ginormous disruption that has happened in the world and hence in the workplace over the last, 20 months or so, something like that, a long time. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing. What are the big themes that you're seeing in the world of hybrid work? And Bina kind of spoke to that as well. Like, what are you seeing? What have the big shifts been from your perspective in the work that you're doing?
Sure. So the key point here, I would say, is we are past the tipping point, in my opinion. Hybrid has won. So McKinsey and Microsoft just did a big global survey, and lots of companies all over the world, and 9 out of 10 companies are planning on adopting a hybrid work model. We do see some companies where they want everybody to go back into the office, and we'll get into this in a little bit because they're uncomfortable. They don't think they can have good culture or innovate or whatever it is. And so they'll dictate it. And immediately, almost the next week, in some cases, they'll have entire teams quit because there are so many options now for everybody to work remotely because companies have adopted this as a policy. And then we have all the freelance platforms as well. During the pandemic, we were working with a number of clients and they were polling their employees. And it was consistently around 5% that want to go back into the office 5 days a week. So every company is now, it's kind of been a domino effect. Even if you don't want to, you have to, or you're going to lose really good people. I was talking to a Fortune 50 CEO a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, I would like everybody to come back into the office, but I would also like people to work for my company. And so we're seeing, it's really interesting, even if a company announces, hey, we're bringing everybody back, the really aggressive recruiters immediately start to go targeting that company. Hey, do you want to work in a more flexible environment, more hybrid? And so Now I think it's more of a question of how to implement hybrid than if you're going to.
Why do you think, we talked a little bit about this when we chatted last week, but why do you think some of those executive teams are so reticent to change, or so reticent to, because that's where I see it as well. It's not the employees or even the human resources folks who are saying, everybody needs to come back, but there's a lot of still, I see resistance from executive teams. What's your kind of assessment of that? And maybe the follow-up question to that is there anything that we can do, we kind of the royal we, to help not convince them, but help them kind of see the light about the new world of work?
Yeah, so it's commonly the executive team that they have had all their success and grown up in their career being in the office. And so it is just super hard for them to visualize that it can work in another way. And even if they've seen it work and their productivity has remained the same or gone up during the pandemic, they're still not bought in. And I'll give you an example. One executive said to me, he's like, I like to look out across the office on a Friday afternoon and I see the buzz. I see everybody in their seats. I see everybody talking. I see everybody moving around. I know that we're being really productive. And in a virtual world, they're staring at the screen in their home office and they don't feel any comfort around it. So it's what we've learned is you have to help them, show them through pilots and other ways to get comfortable with, this is how you can ensure that you can measure productivity. This is how you can facilitate and improve and increase your culture, improve your culture in a hybrid environment, and giving them those examples. And specifically, as an example, if a company is like it was a very office-centric culture where we're in there talking to each other all the time, how do you translate that and show them the map, the transition from how you go from that office-centric culture to where everybody is remote or hybrid and how it can work? How about yourself, Amy? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same thing. One of the conversations I've had with some executives has been around, what did it look like and feel like and sound like when your entire organization, or at least your entire non-exempt organization, was working remote during the height of the pandemic? How did that work? What did productivity look like? Were you aware of what people were working on? Were there things that you didn't know that you wish you knew? Like what were those hidden activities going on in the organization? And usually when you have that conversation, most of them say it was fine and I knew what was happening and people may have been more productive and we were still connected. And we'll talk maybe a little bit about tools in a minute, about what tools you've seen to be successful. And kind of when you get them to reflect back on their own personal experience, they're like, oh, that actually worked pretty well for me. And one of the things that I've found is it's almost like a lack of trust in your workforce. Is kind of that, but if I can't see you, I don't know if you're working. But yet when you're in the office, you don't see people either and you don't know if they're working. It's just that they're sitting there. So you kind of sort of think that maybe they're working. At least you can see their heads. You don't know that they're, surfing Instagram for 4 hours a day. Not that any of us would ever do that. But yeah, so I think it's like, if we can make that experience personal, but there's still, like you said, I think we're just kind of stuck in that old way. It's hard. It's kind of hard for some people to shift their mindset. It's not a change in process. I don't think that's difficult. It's a change in mindset that's so sticky and so hard for people.
Completely agree. And maybe what we could do now is we looked at all the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we're going to try and cover as many as those we can. A lot of them are kind of grouped into similar categories. And so what I thought, maybe, Amy, what I could do is share some of the lessons that we learned that I put in the book that are some of the secrets that we found to how you have a great remote culture and work well remote. And I think it'll cover a lot of those, and then we can kind of go from there. Does that sound okay?
I love that.
Okay, so the key point I want everybody to take away is you can permanently adopt remote work, have a great culture, learn to work collaboratively, and have deep relationships with each other in a virtual environment, but you have to change some of the ways that you operate. And so you hit on one of them, which we learned early on, which the key is to start with trust. So you have to trust your employees in a remote environment. We see companies that are installing software where they monitor their employees every second of the day. They take screenshots of people and what's on their screen every 30 seconds. Please do not do this. What we've learned from doing this for 20 years is you have to trust your employees that they will get the work done. And it is the problem is the exact opposite. People work too much. And you have to train them on how to have balance and find balance in their life, because it's always right there in front of them, sitting on their desk. And so the last thing I would say about a trust is, even before the pandemic, there was a study done on it. If you trust your employees, there's great ROI. You have happier employees, they take better care of your customers, and you actually have higher profit as an organization. The next one is make it okay, take advantage of the power of remote. And I'll tell you what that means. A really quick story. One of our employees made the mistake of, we were talking about all the crazy places that we've taken remote phone calls. And he mentioned on Friday mornings, he would work out, and then we'd have an operations call. And if he had a meeting afterwards, he didn't have time to shower. So he would take his call in the shower. And he would set it up on the ledge and put it on mute. And then, of course, he would be called on and be stand there shivering, turn the water off, and answer the question. I'm not recommending that by any means. But here's what I am trying to say is, there's this mindset of you have to be sitting at your desk from 9 to 5. That's the wrong approach to take. You want employees to take advantage of being remote. So if they need to go to yoga in the middle of the day because it energizes and refreshes them, or they want to take their kid to the park and have lunch with them, actively encourage them. Don't have them hide it. Embrace it. I want people to call me on their way there and tell me that they're doing it. We want them to design their day around what makes them the most productive person. Learn to build relationships virtually. So we actually have to train folks when they come in on how you do that, because it's a little bit different. And I'll give you a few examples. So one, we model vulnerability as a company. So when you're vulnerable as a person, there's actually a lot of studies on this. It is a shortcut to trust. And so when you're in that virtual environment and you are being open about what you're worried about and all of that, you build trust faster. Same thing, we want people to bring their whole personality to work with them. We want to know everything about them, because when you know that person, you're going to trust them faster. Our leaders you have to use different tactics when you lead a virtual workforce. And a few examples, you have to check in much more frequently with individuals. And it's not just talking about business, it's talking about on a personal level as well, to see how they're doing and how they're handling. It is very, very easy for people to get isolated, lonely, and disconnected in a remote work environment. And so there's a lot of things that we build on top of that to ensure that that doesn't happen. Resolving conflict. It is hard in person when you can see all of the cues. Virtually, it's even harder. And so we actually train people on the skill set on how you resolve conflict in a virtual environment. We train everybody in our culture. When they come into our organization, we bring them in for a day and a half. During the pandemic, it was all virtual, but we go through what our core values are. And it's a very fun day. So people understand what your culture is, and then they can kind of go operate better in a virtual environment. A couple other quick things here. Change your meeting structure. In the office environment, you would walk into the conference room for the meeting, and there'd be all these side conversations, or you'd run into somebody in the break room. That stuff does not naturally happen in a virtual world. So you have to recreate that. All the work in a virtual company gets done in virtual meetings. And so we do things like restructuring our virtual meetings to allow for some of that personal connection. So we might start all of our calls with a virtual water cooler, and it's all about connecting on a personal level, sometimes structured, sometimes unstructured. The other point I want to make is face-to-face does not go away in a virtual or remote company. We still get together quite often, but we consciously design it. So it is really, really important, because it energizes and it deepens relationship. And so you want to have what we call a gathering strategy around your organization of when and how at the different levels in the organization you're going to get together. Just a really quick example that I will give you. So we flew everybody and their significant other one year to New Orleans just for party and get together to build culture. And we worked on a community center that had been underwater, but from Katrina, for 30 days. And it was tiring and grueling, and we were all exhausted. And we took 5 busloads back to the hotel. And as I was walking in, there's commotion. I looked, and the entire staff of the hotel line, and they were clapping as we came in. It still gives me chills to talk about it. I can't measure the ROI on that, but what that did for building and deepening bonds is hugely important to us as an organization. We'll get into this. You've got to measure. There's lots of different ways that you can measure, but I can actually tell when there's a culture problem in the organization by the different measurement tools that we use. And then finally, you have to have incredible tools. The tools have really advanced even during the pandemic. But if you have great tools, it makes all the difference between not only the efficiency of how you operate, but it can help you have a better culture. So I know that was a lot, but I wanted to cover a lot of the key things that we do And we can maybe dive into some of those.
Yeah, and we've found the same thing. I mean, I've found the same thing in the work that I do with organizations all over the world. And the research that we do, particularly from the ADP Research Institute, has shown the same things that you're talking about. And how we execute those, I think, again, as we were talking about with executive teams, is always the challenge. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about, and you kind of referred to it, is talking about frequency. And we've had, I think so many of us have grown up in this world where we've looked at very complex models for things like leader development and competency models and all of those things. And what we see, I mean, if you think about it, you don't even have to do any research to find this out. If you think about, for example, all the best leaders that you've ever been in contact with, or the best leader that you've ever had, or the best two leaders that you've ever had. And when you think about that and you go, how were they the same? Like, were they different? Did they show up differently? Did they have different rhythms, different cadences, different approaches, different personalities? Of course they did. So one of the things that we have learned is that frequency is critical. Like, if you're going to double down on one thing in your organization, and this is particularly true, and I think even more important in a remote or hybrid or dynamic work environment, is it's really all about frequent connections. And you said that, Larry, how do you build trust? It's with frequency. And frequency of connections and frequency of attention from your most important people at work. How do you help build resilience? It's frequency. How do you help build engagement? It's frequency. How do you help accelerate performance of your employees? It's frequency. And it doesn't need to be high touch. And especially, again, like you were saying, in this hybrid work environment that so many of us are in, it doesn't have to be a high touch interaction. It doesn't have to be long and complex and over engineered. It can be super light touch. In fact, as simple as, what are your priorities this week and how can I help? And I think what's been most interesting, at least for me, as I've kind of gone through this journey and doing lots of research with real people doing real work in the real world over the last 10 years or so, is that the lack of complexity. Yes, we need to simplify things, but also, what's the cadence? What are we talking about by frequent? And what we found in our work with our clients, and this is across lots of industries, all different size organizations, is that the magic frequency of connection is at least weekly. So when you talk about people doing, and again, I see this a lot from just kind of the common business writings out there and people talking about things, they'll say, oh, we do a monthly check-in or a quarterly check-in. It's like, that's almost counterproductive. So it's, we have to, our work as leaders and as employees, whether we're hybrid or not, that frequency has to match the speed of work. And the speed of work isn't monthly or quarterly or annually. It's the speed of work is like every day, every week. And it's such a game changer to increase that frequency. And of course, when people are remote, we have to be super intentional to do that, because it's really easy to go, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. It seems to be easier. Have you had any, what do you do when you're talking with clients, Larry? How do you help them be more intentional with their connections in a hybrid work environment? You talked about tools, and maybe this is a great place to kind of talk about tools that you recommend, or tools that other organizations have used that you found successful.
Yeah, sure. So mission and vulnerability, the biggest mistake I made leading a remote company was I skimped on tools for way too long. I was proud of how little money we spent, but I didn't realize how much we were actually hurting our organization. And then we went to O365 and Teams, and I'm like, oh my gosh, not only did our productivity go way up, but it improved our culture. And so let me talk about this, because there's a ton here. We saw when the pandemic happened, IT shops they're like, okay, we're installing everything. We've got it covered. We've got all the remote tools installed. And that actually caused more problems, because everybody was confused about which tools that they should use and when, and you're not getting the value. So in organizations where we see that, where they have a unified communication tool, where you get everybody in the whole company using the same tool, that's where you get to really start to get all of the benefits around it, and they're not confused about when to do it. There's a huge change management component that you have to do as well to train people on how best to do it. But then that allows the best remote and hybrid companies learn how to work asynchronously. And so obviously you need the great tools to do that. And let me just, because it's not obvious how they can actually help you build culture. When you install these tools, it's a recordable history of everything that is going on in your company. And so it actually can train new hires on your culture. One employee joined the company is like, oh, I can see all the old chats out there. I see how you treat each other. I see how you talk to each other. So they're learning your culture. The other thing is it helps build sense of belonging and inclusion. And so in our company, we have a lot of veterans that work for us. And when a veteran joins us, the HR team tells them about one of our virtual teams, which is all veterans. And so they immediately join that with people they have great affinity to. And so they immediately have this sense of belonging. And you couldn't do that if it was just in proximity in one building. They're taking advantage across the entire country. And then finally, this is an emerging trend that's happening as a result of everybody being remote and using tools, is all of a sudden you have all the data of how your company is operating. So you have a digital MRI or an X-ray of your organization that we've never had before. And so I think there's amazing insights. There's also some creepiness factor that's going to have to be figured out. But what the studies show, even before the pandemic, is when you have an organization that is that data driven, you have that much knowledge, it causes organizations to actually become more flat. They tend to get smaller and more efficient because you don't have that middle management layer. And so I think you're going to see this massive new field of study that's coming. So there's a lot there. I'll let you comment as well as what you're seeing.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And one of the interesting things that we saw that happened at the beginning of the pandemic, and you're right about IT departments and kind of the scurrying around. Some organizations had to scurry around, others, it was honestly, it wasn't like it was a non-event, but it was much easier for them because they were already prepared. It was easy for people to work from wherever because of the security systems they had in place, because the tools that people had. While I know other organizations really struggled because they had just made this assumption that everybody's going to be in office or everybody's going to be on site, and it will never be any different from that. One of the things that I also observed during that kind of the first weeks or so of the pandemic, when nobody really knew anything, like, how long are we going to be doing this? Is this a short-term thing? We all thought it was much shorter than it actually was going to be, obviously. But I had a couple clients who, I don't want to say it was a seamless transition, but it was a pretty darn seamless transition. And what we saw with those organizations, and it was really a remarkable difference between organizations who had embedded that cadence of frequency in their organization already, and those who did not. Those who, we'll kind of create frequency and maybe we'll do a quarterly something or rather with attention. But when organizations had already had that weekly sequence kind of embedded, that expectation in their organization for those frequent connections, it was like, we're just doing it in a different place. We developed a technology tool probably 10 years ago now to help facilitate that between team leaders and team members. And again, it embeds that expectation of attention into the fabric of the organization. You talked about culture. Like, what are those critical few cultural threads that we as employees should expect no matter what? And that was one of them in this part. I'm thinking of one particular client where it was just, hey, team, my team leader, my manager, I expect you to pay attention to me every week. Like, I expect you to know what I'm working on. I expect you to know who I am. I expect you to see me for all of me in the context of work. I expect you to know where my best is. And so for them, it was a really just, again, it wasn't a non-event because personally it wasn't a non-event, but from a work cadence and flow and connection perspective, it just kind of happened. But if you didn't have that embedded, it was a problem. And I think that's a good lesson for us to learn going forward, is how do we ensure that we're being as proactive as we possibly can. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so rather than being reactive, how do we get proactive, again, around those critical few things that we know that the research shows us, not that we just kind of sort of think, but that data and research shows us are actually critical to having a healthy culture, a healthy work environment, and a work environment in which people can do more of their own unique best work.
So I wanted to shift the conversation to make sure we also got to the future of work. We have the Great Resignation and probably the biggest disruption we've ever had in this working generation. What are you seeing as trends as for companies to think about of what the future of work looks like?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what I was just talking about, Larry. That's such a great question because, again, as you probably have heard this as well, is out talking to the kind of folks and executive teams that both of us get to do in our work every day. It is the number one topic. I mean, everybody's talking about talent and the volatile talent market. And what of course, in the short term, many organizations are doing is they're throwing money at the problem, which I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, by the way. I mean, it's the most available resource. It's the most available thing that we have. It's right next to us. I can do that. We can write checks. We can give people more money. We can offer new recruits more money to come and work for us. We can do that, but that's only going to hold out for so long. That's like the short-term reactive fix. And how do organizations become more proactive, keep the great talent that you might already have, and become proactive so that in the long term, as you were saying with culture, how do we create this culture in which people don't want to leave? And I think there's, again, been a couple really interesting lessons learned, at least for me talking with organizations and quite frankly, inside of our own organization, which is, number one, people are going to leave anyway. Like we can do all the things and people are still going to leave. And we should, and maybe they should, by the way, like they can still be a great performer and go off and do other things. And it's a great opportunity. You should absolutely go take that opportunity. And we should welcome them back if they want to come back, right? We need to, we talk about alumni networks here at the, certainly at Miami, but also organizations. And just because somebody leaves doesn't mean they're a bad employer, they didn't like you, or they didn't like the organization. So I think maintaining really positive relationships with folks who leave is a really good way to kind of keep track of them. And it's not just one thing. And we need to create these cultures where we really are letting people be grown-ups. And you kind of spoke to that originally, right? I don't know how did this happen, where work kind of mimicked seventh grade. I don't know, it kind of feels like seventh grade sometimes in a lot of organizations, right? You kind of have to ask permission to do lots of things. And you were talking about hours, and we're grown-ups, and organizations are filled with really smart grown-ups. It's one of the myths at work when I think, and I'll blame, I'm in HR now, so I kind of blame HR for this, where we've made this assumption that people performance at work kind of fits on and underneath the normal curve, in which case everybody's just kind of sort of average. Like they're fine. They're fine. Actually, that's not the case. It's up and to the right? Most employees in our organizations are doing amazing work and have the potential to do even more amazing work. So if we shift that mindset to say, oh my gosh, look at all this potential and talent in this organization. How do we get more of it? To do that, we need to treat people like grown-ups. And you gave a great example of that, is go do yoga in the middle of the day, take care of what you ever have to take care of. It's more about impact than it is hours, at least on the non-exempt side of the workforce.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple things to that. Those were great. One of the trends that we see is what I would call the rise of the gig worker or the freelancer. So there's some predictions that 50% of the knowledge workers in 10 years will be freelancers. So we've seen this proliferation of platforms that make it very easy for people to now live that lifestyle. They didn't have to go look for the work all the time. And so we're seeing a lot of companies that need to figure out and develop what I would call kind of their it's a shift from talent acquisition to more talent on demand. And how do you do that? If you're going to have a bigger portion of your workforce be kind of this gig or freelance or on-demand talent, you want to make sure that they understand how you operate your culture. You want to make them sticky to your organization, not just quickly coming in and out. And so I think we're going to see that be a big trend in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And so what we're also seeing is that if you want to get access to talent, it's no longer in a 30 mile radius of your headquarters. It can be, you have to look for talent all over the world, especially right now when people are everywhere. And leaders are going to need to learn to spin up teams faster, and you have a much more fluid group of people that are moving in and out of your project that maybe are not doing that. And certainly all the stuff that we talked about, which is, learning to work virtually and asynchronously and being comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, and we call those teams dynamic teams in our world with the work that we do. And I'll speak to one of our large technology clients that we have, and we have the ability to not only look at the hierarchical teams in the work that we do, but we have, from a tech perspective, we also can look at and see, and organizations can create what we call dynamic teams. Like you were saying, those project teams. Again, it's another kind of one of those myths where we think about work happens in just like it looks in an org chart. And org charts are great, by the way, they have a purpose, but they don't, especially now, do a good job at reflecting how work happens, because we're in project teams, we're in ad hoc teams, things are happening all over. And we were actually looking at this and analyzing the data from, and you were talking about data and being able to see into and kind of doing an MRI of our organizations now because we have technology and we can do it. They found that over 70% of their teams were dynamic teams. In other words, as an organization, they were blind to how work was happening inside of their organization. And I think you're right with whether it be a gig worker or whether it be a freelance worker, or quite frankly, we've also seen the rise of the internal talent marketplace where you essentially have internal gig workers. Because if you think about, especially if you're in a bigger organization, there's this talent and people have all these skills and abilities and strengths and passions. We don't know where that is. Most of us can't see into that. We know our own little kind of micro world of people we work with often. And we're kind of missing an opportunity to not only allow people to have some growth opportunities by doing that, but quite frankly, even having awareness of where talent is and where the potential in the organization lies. And everybody's got potential. We just have to go find it and help them put it on the table.
I wanted to make sure we got to some of the questions as well. And so this one actually will be directed at students. Hopefully there's some students on watching. And the question is really around, hey, when I'm graduating and I'm starting a remote job at a company, how do I build new and lasting relationships when I'm not going into the office? How will that work? And so a few ideas for you. So one, I think it's both on the individual, you as a new hire in the company, and on the company. So you want to set up one-on-one time to connect with multiple people. And so in our organization, when a new leader joins us, we give them a list of people 30, 60, and 90 days out that they are to connect with. And it's not just to talk about business, it is connecting on a personal level. And we've actually used some different techniques, like we have these questions that are red, green, and yellow based on your level of comfort in the relationship at this point. So, green's like, what's your favorite baseball team? And, red might be, what is your deepest fear, as an example. But those are ways that you can build relationships. And then make sure you are a contributor. So bring your whole personality to work, but whatever tools are being used, make sure you're regularly out there sharing and part of those online conversations. Amy, what would you add?
Okay, so the red, yellow, green thing, I'm totally going to, I don't want to say steal that, but I think that may show up with somewhere in my work. I think that's genius, actually, Larry, because that comfort level, and I think different people clearly have different comfort levels, and some people never going to get to red, right? Some people are always, that's just where they are, which is fine. But knowing that, and I think having a common language to kind of express that is, hey, here's where I am. I think that's super helpful. I love all of those tips. One of the things that we've been doing lately inside of our organization is encouraging virtual drive-bys. So you think about, hey, we're getting a cup of coffee, or we happen to be walking down the hall and you run into somebody and you have a quick conversation. And a lot of technology tools allow us to do that easier now as well. But being able to do, in fact, I've got a virtual drive-by with one of our employees right after our webinar today. So no agenda, no questions. I mean, it's no kind of determined thing, but just, hey, do you have 15 minutes? Let's just chat a little bit. And you can schedule it or not schedule it. Doesn't make a difference. Doesn't matter where you are in a hierarchy. If you're just kind of interested to talk to somebody, do a virtual drive-by. The other thing that we've done a couple times, which I think has also been pretty successful, is to have virtual office hours, where we've had members of our executive team, our leadership team, to do a half hour, 30 minutes, 45, an hour of just virtual office hours. So you just jump on a call like this, camera's on. If nobody's there, fine, nobody's on. You leave your camera on for an hour. But people can pop in and out if they have questions or they want to just chat about something. That's also another way. It's kind of like a virtual open door policy. A little bit. You remember we used to have those back in the day. So those are two things that I've found have been super helpful. And I think it's such a great question coming from one of our students or soon to be, graduates. And I think we can all apply that. That's not just for somebody who's a new graduate. And I love the work that you guys do in terms of culture for newbies, for people just starting off. And we had another question as well, Molly put up here in the chat for us. What strategies do you suggest? We've kind of talked about this, but I'm just curious if you can get maybe a little bit more granular to help keep your employees connected as one culture. I mean, that kind of elusive C word, I'm not even sure exactly what that means. Culture can mean so many different things. But have you seen any other techniques or recommended or used any other techniques to kind of I'm going to say, stay connected around those critical few kind of cultural strands in an organization?
Yeah. So when I back up and I look at when I wrote the book and I looked at all of the things that I did, I was like, whoa, there is so much here. So it is not like it's not one simple thing, but if you are doing it right, it is infused into everything you do. So, I'll give you just a few examples. So I mentioned we do the training. So the core values that we've been living by for 20 years have not changed. And so we spend a day and a half training everybody on those and our core purpose. But then we have a tool that allows everybody to capture our core purpose is to create unmatched experiences for our clients and employees. We have tools that capture it so people can see examples of it. We start some of our meetings and we'll actually share somebody that's been living our culture. So as an example, we had a couple that recently became U.S. citizens, and the whole team presented them with a flag that had flown over the U.S. Capitol. And we'll share that at the beginning of the meeting because those things continually reinforce it. And then when we get together in person, certainly half the time is just about building personal networks and connections. But during the rest of the meeting, we'll make sure we're covering things so that everybody really understands what we're all about and culture. So it's infused in everything we do. I don't know what you would add, Amy.
Yeah, I think so too. So many of the things that you said, and I think the consistency of core values in an organization is absolutely key. We kind of, again, have this tendency to chase around things and shiny object, and we should do it this way. If they're core values, they should be go, no-goes. I do a lot of work in the performance management space, and oftentimes organizations will want to rate core values. And it's like, if it's a core value, it should just be a go or no go. Like, you either got it or you don't. It's like, you're either ethical or you're not. You're not kind of sort of ethical sometimes. It's all right if you're not ethical on Tuesdays. No, it's not that. It's either in or out, and that consistency. And I love what you said about kind of ability and how you and your organization kind of tell those stories and create those stories. Because it is the example of how we live our core values inside of our organizations. I mean, that's really what it's all about. I have one last question for you, Larry, and then we'll go, because I think we've probably got some questions from folks who are attending and listening to us today. Is there anything that surprised you, or like, what has most surprised you about what's happened in the world of work in the last 2 years, and what do you think the implications are for the future of work? We didn't plan this question, by the way. So, Larry,
that again? Oh, we did. Oh, good. The most surprising thing. For me, and maybe it's because I just lived it for 20 years, just the extreme reticence and pushback, even after it was proven that people, they watched their productivity go up and people were happier. Just this, we're not, reluctance to embrace remote work, kicking and screaming. And so I think it's a good thing. So what's interesting for us is I believe that we actually have a stronger culture because we build it virtually. And so the example I would give is during the pandemic, when mental health was strained, everybody was hurting and everybody reacted to it differently. Because we built those deep connections and we knew how to connect with people when they were virtual on a personal level, we were able to make it through the pandemic very well. And so I know that this is actually where we're going to end up as a world, because I believe it's a better way to work. And yourself, how would you answer that?
I love that. I think that's so important. And I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that I'm not sure, maybe it's a surprise. Maybe it's not, I don't know. But I think as we've worked remote and hybrid and have people on site and off site, one of the things that surprised me in a good way has been how we've all kind of leaned into and been okay with people being real people. Dogs barking, kids, all those kind of things that have happened. Gosh, we're real human beings with things happening. And you mentioned this just a minute ago too, about mental health and how I think people experiencing the trauma and the tragedies that they have in their organizations, I think the gift of that tragedy, or one of the gifts of that tragedy, because there's always one in there, but one of the gifts has been realization and the commonization, if you will, of mental health and people's well-being and people's how they're feeling, it's becoming much more okay to talk about that. I mean, we see it in sports all the time, right? People are talking about, we've seen so many examples of that. And we've seen examples, I'm sure you have too, in the work world. And I think it's just, gosh, as human beings, we all go through things. We all have hard days, and sometimes more than others. And sometimes people need additional support for that. And I think making it okay to talk about is a huge move forward, and really an acceleration of something we've been talking about well-being forever in the work world. I mean, it's been decades, right? We've been talking about well-being and wellness programs, but I think it has become much more real now and much more, I don't know, I think organizations are willing to make an investment and willing to make it okay to talk about. And I think the acceleration of that trend, as so many things have just been accelerated through the pandemic, I think that's a big win for everybody.
I love it.
I think Molly. I think Molly's going to ask us questions here. If you've got, there she is. Hi, Molly.
Hello.
By the way, Molly, what was your major? What did you graduate in?
Sociology, as a matter of fact, completely unrelated to engineering and computing. However, seeing as I've become the liaison to the College of Engineering and Computing, I currently have a super obsession about my son attending the College of Engineering and Computing. I've been sold pretty hard on the school. So hopefully at least one of us, the legacy, I guess, will be a CEC alum. First of all, thank you so much for that conversation. I have this feeling that what I heard from you, your philosophies that you're employing and practicing, are music to so many ears. I really think that this pandemic has really allowed us to see how we can work well and collaboratively, and not sort of, in the prison of tradition of being in the office and, every single day driving, making the commute, and sort of all the stuff that goes with that. So I really enjoyed hearing the conversation today. At this point, I am going to bring one Clark Kelly to join us. Clark is here in place of Dr. Sukumaran, and he is the Assistant Dean of External Relations and Communication here in the College of Engineering and Computing. He is joining us to moderate some more questions that came in during the webinar. So welcome, Clark. How are you feeling about these philosophies? And I removed Clark. I'm so very sorry. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. And Amy and Larry, fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed listening with you. Larry, you talked right in the beginning about some things that companies do wrong, and that was constantly monitoring everything that they're doing, the screenshots, that type of thing. And you've talked extensively about developing a culture of remote work, but many companies don't have that culture yet. And during the pandemic, being in a home office, there was a tendency to hit the computer at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then all of a sudden an email would come in at 9 o'clock at night that needed to be answered. So what do you, when you're consulting a company, not yours where you've created a culture, but how do you help a company stop the workaholics from turning their home office into a 24/7?
Yeah. So it is on both the employee and the employer. And I'll dive into that a little bit. So as an individual, you want to do things, you have to develop some discipline around managing your day and how best you work. There's something called, I think it's called Feierabend, and it's a German word, which is their traditional way of signifying that you're ending your day. So for the German, they're maybe cracking a beer. Whatever it is for you, you go outside and you do it, take your dog for a walk. You're ending your day and you're not going back and you're not going to go look at your laptop. The other thing is there's actually in some of the software, you can have quiet hours. I turned off all of my notifications on my phone because it was just 24/7. And so the only way to get me after 6 or 7 o'clock is you're gonna have to call me or send me a text. And that doesn't happen that often anymore. So there are a lot of things that you can do to design your personal day and have some discipline around it. As an organization, as a leader, you can't expect people, you don't want them to answer your chat at midnight or you send them that email. Please don't make that expectation because you're going to burn everybody out. Zoom fatigue is real. And so you want to do things like designing breaks throughout your day. There's been a lot of recent studies by being on video all the time. It actually tires the brain more than being in person and seeing people. So we do a lot of our video calls where we allow people to turn them all off or make it optional. Certain cases you want them on, but in a lot of cases we allow that so that it provides that break. So does that give you a sense? And Amy, I don't know if there's anything that you would add to that.
Yeah, I think same thing. Those are really good tips. One of the things that I've also noticed is that oftentimes we will expect that one person's best work kind of approach, 9 to 5, or don't do one thing at one time, or, working continuous hours or not, or whatever might happen to work best for one person who may be at a higher level in an organization is best for everybody. And I loved what you said about that, Larry. We need to give people the space to create their own best work approach. And that's going to be different for different people. Some people may have work later into the night because that works for them. Or some people might be early morning, or some people might go for a run in the middle of the day, or school pickup or drop off. And it's, we have to be focusing on impact, less hours if we can from a regulatory and compliance perspective. But for knowledge workers, it's about impact. So give people the space to figure out how it works best for them, how their workday is going to work best. And don't project very strict, over-structured, over-engineered guidelines for people. Again, they're super smart grown-ups. Let them, let folks give them some flexibility in terms of what their best workday looks like.
Excellent. We're getting several questions coming through, so let me read one to you. Related to virtual overload, distractions, burnout, how do we manage the massive amount of chats, Teams, pings, pongs going on?
Yeah, there can be that overload. So it's a combination of process, training, and tools is how I would answer that. So there's great power in learning to work asynchronously, but you have to train everybody how to do that most effectively and efficiently. So one is getting everybody on the same tool. So when we, as an example, when we installed Teams and starting using it, 1 week, our email traffic went down to 25%. Now, so you've eliminated one of your channels essentially. So now today, a work email that's from somebody internally in my organization is very rare unless it's an outside email. So that's one way that we've done it. Most software allows for both simultaneous, so you can have one-on-one conversations with people and then as a group. And so learning as an employee, when is the best time for me to be additive to the dialogue, and when does it make sense for me to have this sidebar conversation with this person, much like you would have like if you were physically sitting in a conference room. And then one cool thing also, I've seen some companies, this is really amazing, they've actually added emojis that match their core values or icons. And so it allows people to reinforce culture like we were just talking about. So Amy, I don't know if you have anything you would add.
Yeah, I have a super tactical one that works for me and my team really well. Is we have a couple shortcut kind of acronyms. So, and this is great again for whole organizations if you can create a norm around it. So for example, a JSYK is just so you know, which means you don't have to do anything with it, just want to keep you informed, whether it be one-on-one to a person in a chat or whether it be to a whole team. It's really helpful to go, oh, just so you know, that means you don't have to do anything. We also sometimes will use a rabbit emoji. I do this particularly with one of my team members, but we have a tendency to go down a rabbit hole, right? And then we'll spend an hour kind of talking about something that's interesting, but maybe not super urgent or doesn't need to be done right now. So we'll give each other permission to go, hey, this is a rabbit hole thing. Maybe you can come back to it later and we can talk about it, or not. It might just kind of be a little bit interesting. And then also action required or action needed. Be really clear about when you're asking for something to be done and when it needs to be done by. I think just those few little things can also really help cut down on that tendency that we have to, oh my gosh, my boss is emailing me or my boss is slacking me or messaging me, I need to respond right away. It's like, no, give people permission, help them understand what's urgent and what's not urgent.
Excellent. So Larry, you mentioned sidebar conversations. So when you're in a virtual meeting with your team, what's your culture on people whispering back and forth to each other in private chats?
So our culture is one of transparency and the kind truth. And so we actually train everybody in the organization on how to do that. So we don't like politics and we don't want people going around and saying something. So there's two different questions there. There's one that, so hopefully the conversation is anything that needs to be transparently said. Maybe you disagree with something, that you're saying it in the group, or you're having, if that person hurt your feelings or offended you, then you go and you of course do a one-on-one conversation. But if it's something that's not helpful and you're having that one-on-one, if it's something to clarify, great. But doing it for the greater good is what we try to encourage.
Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I'll just give a super quick little tool that I've seen organizations do. They do a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. And sometimes even taking a break in a meeting to go, okay, just want to do a quick check. How's everybody doing? And you can do it virtually as well, right? With an emoji. It doesn't have to be like on video camera, to your point, Larry. And I love giving people permission not to be on video. But sometimes even just doing those quick checks where you don't have to go into a big explanation of anything, but doing that quick gut check will sometimes help, as you were talking about transparency, help people feel a little bit more open about how they're feeling around that particular topic. And maybe we can cut down a little bit on some of those side conversations. We know they're still going to happen. I mean, of course, we're kind of human. We've all got our moments where we get frustrated and we want to share with a trusted colleague at work. But I think getting, again, more open and more used to and more accepting of, it's okay if you're not 100% in agreement. And it doesn't matter, again, it's not a hierarchical thing, that it's okay. And we can either take it offline and talk about it later, or maybe this means that we table this topic for right now until we get some of those other issues resolved.
So we have a question from the audience, and they state, while not exactly your specialty, do you have any advice to help a better virtual program culture for education and or outreach activities for 7th to 12th grade students?
Well, this is going to be me guessing because I just don't have that experience. So if it was because my kids make fun of me, I use Snapchat, but they say I use it incorrectly. So what I would try and do is a lot of the concepts that we've learned, I would try and figure out which of those apply to that younger generation, because there's no question. I mean, they're digitally native and they think and communicate in a little bit different way. I would try and apply the concepts that we've learned with, the working world, and see which ones are sticky for them.
Yeah, and I think, lean into those things that we know. People have said this for decades, right? Have dinner together every night. Talk about your work in front of your kids. My husband and I both have our engineers, and one of our sons is a mechanical engineer, and talking about and giving them exposure to things that are actually happening real world. One of my favorite things is one of my kids has been known to say multiple times, it's like, Mom, you sound like you're at work. And it's like, but he has, now that he's grown up, has learned so many things from those conversations. And yeah, so I agree. I think that, there's not, we talk about multiple generations in the workplace, and, boomers and, folks that are, the three of us, I'm just going to assume here, kind of in our age range and our generation, our level of tenure and maturity at work. We're pretty digital too. So I think one of the kind of the myth busters is we're more alike than we are different. We've got more commonalities. And I think sometimes being, maybe not being so separatist about generation stuff is also a good thing. And lean into everybody's expertise. Be super curious. Let's just go be super, super curious. And, oh, that's cool. What are you doing? What can I learn from that? It's okay to ask your high school kids or your younger kids or your college kids or friends, hey, what are you doing in your world right now? What's interesting to you? What are you learning? What tools are you using? I think we need to make those conversations a little bit more of a habit.
Amy and Larry, you've both been incredibly generous with your time with us. And I want to give you the opportunity in the closing minutes here, if you have any last closing thoughts, gems to share with us.
So one, thank you for everybody listening. Hopefully that was helpful. I will leave you. So Mark Andreessen, who actually created the Netscape browser, kind of the father of the internet, essentially, he just recently had a quote that he believes that this remote work revolution is even bigger than the internet because it has the power to bring opportunity to everybody in the world that hasn't had it in the future. So I am couldn't be more excited with what I think is going to happen to the world in a very positive way.
Yeah, but again, once again, Larry, I love that. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I would just say from my seat in the House and the work that I get to do every day, and both at, from a work perspective as well as a personal perspective, is let's just shift our mindset. If we can help people to kind of turn their mindsets upside down, and rather than looking at people and employees or family members or friends as broken and needing to be fixed, people are amazing opportunities to be amplified. And we each have unique strengths and gifts inside of us. And I think our job as leaders, our job as parents, our jobs as friends, as neighbors, as community members, is to really help people. How do we help them do more of those things that they love and add more outstanding value to their day-to-day lives? We have a tremendous opportunity. And I think the changes and challenges that we've been through the last couple of years have helped accelerate that, I hope.
Amy and Larry, on behalf of Dean Sukumaran, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And also on behalf of the CEC Women's Advisory Committee, your expertise is exactly what we need to hear. Molly, back to you.
Thank you, Clark. Excellent job. And I just want to say thank you, Amy, for saying that, there's no need to be so separatist generationally, and Larry for using the phrase digitally native. I think that can really help sort of bridge a gap between those of us who weren't brought up in the digital landscape and those of us who all we know is a digital landscape. And sometimes those communication barriers are taller than maybe they need to be. So thank you for putting that out into the ether, and hopefully people will take those little nuggets and sort of remember them and use them wisely. Really, such a great conversation. I suspect that many people could probably use so many more hours of your good advice and counsel, particularly as this just becomes more and more relevant with each passing day. Thank you so much for your time, Larry English, Amy Leschke-Kahle. You have been so generous with your time. Again, as Clark said, a special thanks to the CEC Women's Advisory Council, the College of Engineering and Computing, and CEC Dean Bina Sukumaran for bringing us this webinar today. As a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be available on our website later today. You can find Larry's book, Office Optional: How to Build a Connected Culture with Virtual Teams, through his website at centricconsulting.com. And please remember to check out our other webinar presentations at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Thank you all for joining us today, and love and honor to you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.